Okay, so I'm usually seen on RANCAT sort of. I'm usually seen as a virtue ethics kind of guy, and like any archaic eudaimonist, I have to give a taxonomy of the virtues. I have to explain what virtues I find valuable and try and enumerate them. Obviously, any such attempt is going to be pretty superficial, because all I'm really doing is appending words to broad and arbitrarily defined concepts. But basically, here's what I value. So my reading of virtue ethics is kind of self-help bookish. So it rejects a demand-side morality. It says, you know, the is-ought problem just destroys any kind of requirement of us towards others, and seeks to answer the question, okay, but what should I do then, with a since-then set of propositions. So, since you seek to achieve your ends, that means that there must be some ultimate end that you're trying to attain, the proof being that if you are deciding between one end and the other end, then the end being served by the action of deciding can't be the first end, and it can't be the second end, because then you wouldn't have to make the decision at all, and it can't be, you know, both ends, or A or B. It has to be something different, it has to be something else, it has to be something higher, and that's what we call eudaimonia, right? It's our ultimate end, it's our happiness. So, since you seek to achieve your ends by your very action, by your very asking me what you should do, you are seeking to achieve some ends. So since you seek to achieve some ends, you have eudaimonia, you have your ultimate end. Then you should do all of these things. So the whole point of establishing a set of virtues according to which you should live your life is, you know, kind of self-helpy, as I've said. Here is how to attain your ultimate end, here is how to attain happiness. And obviously lots of thinkers have done this kind of thing over time, but I've tried to sort out a kind of a way of looking at it that satisfies my libertarian preconceptions, the kind of things that I would want from a virtue ethics approach to morality are libertarian conclusions. That's what I want to reach. So I attempt to categorize the virtues into 4 separate groups. So duty, justice, beneficence, and good living. Obviously, those can be interpreted in a whole bunch of different ways. So I'm gonna try and elaborate on them in such a way that you understand what I mean, both intellectually and emotionally. So duty is defined as what I feel I should do. So it's erogatory, it's personal. So it's things that are required of you, but they're not things that you should be punished for if you don't do them. So a lot of people feel like you have the duty to provide food for the poor. I disagree. I think that's super erogatory, but I would say that that is what duty would look like, right? So a lot of people think that that's a duty. You probably had that kind of feeling at some point in your life, that, you know, you do have a duty to help the poor. That's the kind of feeling that I'm trying to evoke. And duty, according to this kind of theory, would consist in leaving other people alone, according to the principle of strict voluntarity. So, or alternatively, strong voluntarity. This is something that I've elaborated on at length in various posts on anarcho-capitalism, but the idea is that you try and not take away any possible choice outcomes that occur, that a person could possibly have through their action. So the idea is a person has a certain number of choices, but they always have that number of choices. At any time, you could stand up and do the hokey cokey and put your pants on your head and whatever, right? But it will lead often to similar outcomes no matter what you do. So doing the hokey cokey is going to lead to a similar outcome if you are on your own in your room, as I am, as would doing any other kind of dance. So what actually matters here is the number of choice outcomes that you have at any particular time, and not infringing on, not taking away any number of choice outcomes that a person has is, in my view, the content of duty. Again, it's what you feel you should have, what you should do for others, or not do for others, that is. And it seems pretty arbitrary, but we'll try and elaborate on that later on once we've had the overview. Justice is the next one. So this is what I feel people should be punished for, and what I would be willing to be punished for if I broke the demands of justice. Excuse me, the justice. So justice permits or requires force. I haven't actually decided which, but basically, if somebody is, for example, breaking the non-aggression principle, which I personally think is the content of justice, is fulfilling the non-aggression principle, I feel like people should be punished for aggressing against others. So I would find it acceptable in myself to aggress against somebody who had aggressed against somebody else. I would act as that person's agent in order to bring their aggressor to justice, right? So that's what justice is, and it's treating people in the way that they ought to be treated, I think, is probably the best way to look at it, is the way that they deserve to be treated is the content of justice. But I feel like in a libertarian framework there should still be a low requirement, so that's why I think justice is best served by the non-aggression principle. Beneficence is what I feel would be good if I did it, right? So helping the poor would fall under beneficence, in my view at least. It's supererogatory. It's not required of me. I still think the world would be a better place if I did that. And in a virtue ethicsy framework, it's actually more of a continuum between this and duty, because it's the things that I ought to be doing in order to maximize my ends seems to be more like along a continuum. So duty would be what I feel I really ought to do, and beneficence would be more what I feel would be good, right? What would make me happier if I did it. So helping the poor would make me feel more, secure in being a decent person or whatever. But I still think there is a decent dividing line between the two. Finally, good living. So how I should behave when my action doesn't affect other people very much. So for example, temperance is an aspect of good living. If I do things in moderation, if I drink in moderation, if I eat in moderation, whatever, then that doesn't really have that much of an effect on other people. Like, there are small ways in which it probably does, but right, it doesn't seem to be a coherently strong moral requirement of you either way, except for as a moral requirement of yourself to yourself. So you require some things of yourself so that you will be happy, and those things, some of those things don't affect others, and those things are beneficent. Those things are good living. So another one would be honour, right? Either doing or not doing what honour requires of you isn't going to affect others very much, unless, of course, achieving that end is the process of achieving the end of serving the requirements of honour do affect other people, but honour per se isn't a thing that affects other people, so honour would also fall under the category of good living. So this is unique because it's internal, right? So duty is erogatory, so it's required of you, but it's personal. It's not something that you could force on others. Justice is something that you can force on others, but it is also erogatory, so it's required of people, and you can force them legitimately to act in that way. Beneficence is supererogatory, so it's not required of you, it's just would be good, you know, would make you happy. And good living is internal to you, so it's like each of them has their own unique aspect, right? So why should we distinguish duty and justice? Well, justice is punishable, obviously, so it has to involve some kind of element of reciprocity. So if you breach somebody's bubble in the sense of aggressing against them, actively, like hurting them or taking their property or whatever, then that seems to justify a reciprocal act to restore justice. That's why we feel outrage, right? You want to restore the balance because you are outraged. You want revenge, or you want to enact revenge on the behalf of another person who can't help themselves, or whatever, right? Whereas breaching somebody's bubble in the sense of taking away one of their possible choice outcomes doesn't seem to call for any kind of a reciprocal action to punish them. So, for example, if I'm talking in my room to the camera, my mother walks in, she's going to want to talk to me about something. Now, that's inconsiderate, and she should probably stop herself from doing that. It's her duty not to do that while I'm recording the video, because that would take away my number of possible choice outcomes. Because I'm alone, I get to do whatever I want, and then she comes in, and then either I talk to her, that's my one choice outcome, or I don't, and have elicit a negative reaction from her. So that's the other choice outcome. There's basically two of them, right? So that's kind of sucky, but she doesn't deserve any kind of punishment for it. It doesn't feel like I'm outraged, right? So that's I feel the distinction between duty and justice, and that's what I feel justifies the requirements of justice as being grounded in the non-aggression principle, and the requirements of duty as being grounded in strict voluntarity, making sure that the other person, that you're not infringing upon the number of choice outcomes that the other person has. And finally, why do we distinguish between beneficence and duty then? Because obviously in a virtue ethics framework, these are all things that you feel like you should be doing in order that you be a happier person, and especially duty and beneficence don't seem to have that much of a distinction. They seem to be along more of a continuum. I would say that the thing that divides them is duty is a refraining. Duty is a negative. Duty is, I should not infringe on the number of choice outcomes that the other person has. Beneficence is, I should add to the number of choice outcomes that they have, and I should make the choice outcomes that they have presently better. So, you know, you might leave a person with the same number of choice outcomes, but you might make one of those choice outcomes better for them by giving them money or whatever. Improving their lives. So it's a positive contribution, whereas duty is leaving others alone. So that I think is a framework along which you can draw distinctions between the various categories of virtue. So it's kind of an attempt towards a taxonomy of the virtues, and the degrees to which they are punishable, not punishable, required, not required, or personal, external. And I think it's valuable to be able to draw that kind of distinction, especially in such a legalistic kind of paradigm as that which anarcho-capitalists are used to operating in. Obviously, this has a lot of implications for the distinction or the battles between the left anarchists and the right anarchists, especially the market anarchists, and I kind of want to address that kind of thing later, but this video was more to attempt to give people an idea of the kind of where I'm coming from I mean, when I say this kind of thing, obviously this isn't a concrete. This isn't, these are my ideas and I'm going to stick to them forever, because I just made them up like relatively recently, like a couple of months ago, right? So, obviously it's not an absolute thing. But this is where I'm coming from right now, and when I say that I'm coming from a generally virtue ethicsy framework, from a kind of Roderick Long Aristotelian kind of perspective, this is the flavour thereof that I'm trying to operate along. And I suppose any upcoming videos, if there are any, would probably either explicitly deviate from this, or can be assumed to be working within this kind of framework or tradition. Well, I don't want to say tradition because I just made it up, but you know what I mean. Or don't, whatever. So, I think that is a decently comprehensive look at the virtues, in the sense that any virtue that you could describe to me could probably be fit into one of those categories, not in the sense that I think I've solved virtue ethics, but rather in the sense that that's a framework along which I can look at the virtues, and I think that is probably valuable. So if it was of value to you, that makes me happy. If it wasn't, complain at me in the comments. And have a nice day, and thank you for watching.